We went on a kind of family holiday to Yosemite National Park in California when I was 14. And we were there for a couple of weeks. And I remember after about 10 days in Yosemite, I came across the exhibition by Ansel Adams, where there's a permanent exhibition by the American photographer. Many of you will know his name. And he took some of his most famous pictures in Yosemite National Park. And what was incredible was experiencing this place where I'd been 10 days already, but through the eyes of a photographer, and how in actual fact, when I spent the next 3 days around the national park, how his photographs somehow unlocked things in this place that I'd been for 10 days but hadn't noticed before. And it was this way that photography, and particularly with Ansel Adams, it's his use of clouds and the whole kind of motif of clouds, where suddenly I started looking at this landscape and noticing these big clouds. Now, of course, I was only 14, so I was kind of very impressionable, but it was quite an extraordinary experience. And that's when, that Christmas, I got an old Canon AE-1 from my parents, and basically just started, taking photographs, and quite obsessively. But when it came to working as a professional photographer, one of my neighbours is a guy called Greg Williams, who he's now a kind of quite a famous Hollywood photographer. He does a lot of Hollywood stars. But at the time, he was a war photographer, and he had just come back from Chechnya, and he'd done a lot in Somalia. And I just graduated, and he kind of would regale me with these fantastic stories, about being a war photographer. And I kind of was just thought, that sounds quite interesting. And I basically started looking into photography as a career, and quickly realised that conflict photography wasn't something I was interested in, but certainly photography as a way of exploring social issues, particularly the kind of things that I'd studied at university, would be the kind of way forward. And also I think there's something about the lifestyle. I'm a very transient person. I kind of like kind of moving around and experiencing new things, and photography in the early years was something that really enabled me to do that. So when I was at Sheffield, the NCTJ course is really designed to train you as a news photographer. So we were going out covering daily news stories, and I left the course after about 6 months, having got a job on a local news agency called Ross Parry. And basically Ross Parry cover regional news, so Yorkshire news, on behalf of the national press. So what we would do is we'd pay off the Sheffield Star to get a copy from the porter before it was out on the street. We'd look at, quickly try and find what the big story of the day was, and then reshoot it on behalf of the Sun or the Telegraph, etc. And it was kind of a very kind of quick turnaround. And I really didn't kind of enjoy that process, where there was none of it was that you never had time to kind of consider what it was you were doing. You were literally just going out, taking a kind of a picture, wiring it, and getting into tomorrow's paper. So at the time I started working on my own project, which was in this boxing gym where Prince Naseem used to train in Sheffield. At the time Prince Naseem was a famous boxer. And I started following this young kid in the background called Daniel. At the time he was 14. As I started photographing him, what became interesting about Daniel was the fact that he tap danced. And so here suddenly that you could started looking at this story which challenged this whole kind of stereotype of the kind of masculine, strong male boxer, and here he was out tap dancing. What I started doing with these pictures was, what was funny was how he was being talked about as this next big thing. And so I started looking for pictures which almost were metaphors for this idea of the messianic, the kind of Daniel. And it was really, as I was working on this story, that I began becoming more interested in storytelling rather than news photography. And of course, the avenue for this kind of photography was in magazines. And so I decided to try and basically shift my practice from news photography to magazine photography. And this series of pictures won the Ian Parry Award, the Sunday Times Young Photographer of the Year, which meant that I could move to London and began freelancing for the Sunday Times magazine.